Good afternoon and good evening. My name is John Herbst. I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. We have a wonderful event today, which we are bringing to you in conjunction with the International Tax Investment Center. We have a report done by Dr. Ariel Cohen on resilience after COVID-19 in Central Asia. And our panel today includes Ambassador Yerjan Kazikhanov, the Kazakhstan ambassador in Washington. We have Frauke Jungblut from the Europe and Central Asia desk at the World Bank. We have Jonathan Hennick, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia at the State Department. So we will start, but first I'll give a word to Daniel Witt from the Investment Center, please.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Herbst. ITIC is delighted to again be partnering with the Atlantic Council to release yet another Central Asia paper. I think all of us gathered today understand the importance to the world of Central Asia and how it touches on all three pillars of the program that we have at ITIC known as energy, growth, and security. And today we will be launching our newest study authored by Ariel Cohen and James Grant that outlines policy solutions for spurring economic growth post-COVID in Central Asia. Now, even with the surge of infections over the last few days, the impact of COVID in Central Asia, happily and fortunately, has been milder compared to many countries in the world. However, the economic impact has been significant. Recent predictions are for a net decline in GDP in 2020 of up to 5%. This, combined with levels of debt, will severely limit the fiscal space as governments continue to invest in critical health programs and other social safety nets. Yet, governments cannot abandon pro-growth measures to attract investment and spur economic recovery. This is the focus of the paper and our discussion today. But I know Dr. Cohen and I are optimists. Looking back at the amazing progress of the countries of Central Asia during their 29 years since independence, we're confident that COVID-19 would be yet another challenge that their resilience, strength, and good planning can overcome. And if addressed properly, these unprecedented challenges could result in a more market-oriented, competitive, prosperous, and open Central Asia. Thank you, and I look forward to a lively discussion.
Dan, thank you. The Atlantic Council likes surprises, at least it likes good surprises. And we've got one for all of our guests today. As I think you know, yesterday there was a meeting of the C5+1, the Secretary of State and the foreign ministers of the 5 Central Asian countries, a virtual meeting. And Jonathan Hennick, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, is here to describe what happened at that meeting. And after that, we will turn to the report. So Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Herbst, and thank you for having me here today. I'm delighted to read out yesterday's C5+1 high-level dialogue that Secretary Pompeo and Undersecretary David Hale participated in virtually with the 5 Central Asian foreign ministers. Yesterday's meeting was a follow-on to the C5+1 ministerial meeting held in Tashkent during Secretary Pompeo's visit there in February. And yesterday, Secretary Pompeo, Undersecretary Hale, and the 5 Central Asian foreign ministers discussed the many challenges we're all facing today as a result of the COVID-19 epidemic. In addressing these new challenges together, the Secretary reiterated our steadfast support for and longstanding commitment to the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of all 5 Central Asian states. These principles remain the cornerstone of the U.S. Central Asia strategy. Secretary Pompeo has consistently emphasized that the United States has a vested interest in Central Asia's stability, prosperity, and security. Our policy has always been to ensure that each Central Asian state has options in pursuing their own national interests and to not depend on any one country for their trade and development. We envision and we're working toward a better connected, more prosperous, and more secure Central Asia region, which will benefit the C5 countries, the United States, and the global community. Yesterday's meeting was a reaffirmation of our joint commitment to the C5+1 platform. Since its creation, it has emerged as an example of the flexible and inclusive multilateralism that the United States seeks to advance. The joint projects implemented under the C5+1 auspices support our shared goals of increasing economic connectivity and trade, mitigating environmental challenges, and collaboratively addressing security threats. Only by working together can we build a more connected, prosperous, and secure Central Asian region. One of the primary agenda items at yesterday's C5+1 dialogue was, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact. COVID-19 poses unprecedented challenges to economic growth and to the movement of goods and people across borders for each of our countries. As our efforts through the C5+1 framework show, we believe that regional partnership and greater economic integration are keys to prosperity and resilience. The United States has been a leading partner in building the health system capacity in Central Asia. We have invested about $500 million in Central Asian health capacity in the last 15 years, including to address problems such as tuberculosis and HIV. Just in this crisis alone, we've devoted an additional $25 million to help support our partner countries there to prevent and control infection, bolster health screening, communicate risks to citizens, and coordinate readiness and response efforts. As a leading shareholder in the IMF, World Bank, and Asian Development Bank, the United States has also been instrumental in these institutions' provisions of nearly $3 billion in COVID-19 response aid to the Central Asian states. And we are leading the negotiations on the Paris Club G20 debt service suspension initiative, which can provide Central Asian countries with millions more in debt relief. One of the other main agenda items yesterday was economic resilience. As we look beyond the immediate crisis to long-term recovery, the United States encourages our partners in Central Asia to strengthen economic diversification and resilience by accelerating political and market-oriented economic reforms, including protections for human rights and strengthening favorable investment conditions that will attract the U.S. and other foreign investment critical for post-COVID-19 economic recovery. Central Asian states must continue to pursue critical and long overdue structural reforms that can guarantee sustainable long-term political stability and economic growth for the people of Central Asia. Our commitment to Central Asia will not waver as we work together to rebuild and to achieve partnership, peace, and prosperity in the post-COVID period. With this goal in mind, the C5+1 participants yesterday agreed on an ambitious plan of work for the C5+1 working groups. I would encourage you all to review the public outcome documents from the meeting, which should have either been released or will be released shortly. We are very interested in revitalizing the working groups as public health conditions permit. Let me focus here on what we want to do in the near term with the C5+1 economic working group. First, we will ask the economic working group to convene to discuss food security and a safe and reliable flow of goods and services across the region and with the United States, including through the generalized system of preferences as appropriate. Second, we will also explore options for greater cooperation with the United States International Development Finance Corporation, the U.S. Export-Import Bank, Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration, and requirements for entry into the Blue Dot and Economic Prosperity Networks. Third, we will also seek to improve the enabling environment for women in the economy and identify where the C5+1 can support women as agents of economic recovery and prosperity. And then finally, the economic working group will discuss in future meetings public health, agriculture, tourism, a regional passenger and cargo center, information technology, liberalized visa regimes in the region, increased financial transparency and resilience, and developing the digital Silk Road using secure telecommunications and digital network technology. Of course, in addition to COVID-19 and economic resilience, participants yesterday also discussed regional peace and security, including the Afghan peace process. Ambassador Khalilzad spoke to the group from his travels from Tashkent, reiterating the urgency of preserving the positive momentum of recent developments and starting intra-Afghan negotiations to end the war in Afghanistan. The Development Finance Corporation CEO, Adam Bowler, accompanied Ambassador Khalilzad on his trip to this week to the region. We recognize that Afghan peace, economic growth, and regional connectivity are closely linked and mutually supportive. The United States firmly believes that a stable and economically prosperous Afghanistan is critical for regional peace and security in Central Asia. And we appreciate the vital cooperation and assistance of our partners in the C5+1 as we all work towards this shared goal. And I do want to just wrap up by commending, the Daniel and Dr. Cohen and the team that worked on this terrific report, which frankly speaks very much to the policy objectives that we discussed yesterday. Thank you very much.
Jonathan, thank you. And Ariel, you got your first big endorsement right there. So since we're not going to go through the report line by line, Ariel, why don't you tell us how the report relates to what's happening in Central Asia, as you might say, the 30,000-foot view of the region and resilience.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Secretary Hennick. It really touches me that you provided a wholehearted endorsement. I, first of all, would like to thank my co-author and colleague, James Grant, and our terrific team of interns, Reagan Abner, Carolee Barbashi, Bogdan Puchkov, David Pasmanik, and Jana Sirbiladze for helping us to develop this report. Without them, this would not have happened. Central Asia is a strategic part of the world. It's a part of the world where interests of Russia, China, Iran, Europe, and the United States collide. And of course, it's an ancient area with great, deep culture, goes back over 2,000 years. And therefore, I argued throughout my career in a number of books, monographs, and articles that the United States has vital interests in Central Asia, as we see now with the search for peace in Afghanistan and, to be honest, in competition with the rising China. And therefore, the blow that COVID-19 delivered to Central Asian emerging markets, emerging countries, is a very negative experience. It's a stress test, just as it is for us in the United States, and it is for other countries, be it Europe, be it Latin America, Africa, or elsewhere. And I must say, judging by the officially reported numbers, 20,000 cases in Kazakhstan, the highest among the countries, with over 200, unfortunately, deceased. 6,500 reported cases in Uzbekistan, with several hundred deceased. Despite the fact that different places report cases and report deaths in a different manner, it's a problem throughout the world. Do you report a death that is comorbid with COVID, but the death was because of a heart attack or brain hemorrhage as a COVID death or a non-COVID death? There is guidance from WHO to address that. And based on that reporting, Central Asia, despite all the tragedies relative to other places like Brazil or even the United States, is not doing so horribly based on per capita cases and per capita mortality. That's point number one. Point number two, in those countries in Central Asia that are relying very heavily on natural resources and primarily on hydrocarbons, in case of Kazakhstan, oil, in case of Turkmenistan, gas, in case of Uzbekistan, to a certain extent, gas as well. This is a demonstration how vital it is to diversify the economy, how it is no longer possible to rely on hydrocarbons going forward, how we argue it is important to start developing renewables, to train people both on the level of blue collar labor, people who work, let's say, in coal mines or in oil fields, to train them to become workers in the renewable energy, and to train government decision makers, engineers, lawyers, policymakers, how to transition to the renewables, because the drop of the oil and gas prices, the decline, sharp decline of demand for Turkmen gas in China, for example, or for oil in the global markets, that suggests that this reliance on a monoculture is not a good thing. Secondly, clearly, the countries need to adopt policies to evaluate their resilience and to build towards resilience. In Central Asia, there were plenty of earthquakes. Remember the Tashkent earthquake? Was it 1966 or 68? I remember it because I'm old enough. But it was a horrible, horrible earthquake. And other emergencies, droughts, etc. Countries need to build resilience and to cooperate in the region together to fight these disasters and have policies that allow interoperability of the countries. And talking about interoperability, as Deputy Assistant Secretary mentioned, intra-regional trade remains very important. It is not a good idea to block trade on the borders, and we saw Kazakhstan taking a step back. Initially, they banned certain exports of foodstuffs, and then they walked it back because the international financial institutions, international trade institutions appealed to the government in Nur Sultan, and they did the right thing. Finally, I would say development of human resources will be very, very important. For example, large percentages of income, of GDP, for countries like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, to a certain degree, Uzbekistan, came from remittances, from people who worked in Russia. These people are coming back now and need to be trained to be adequately and productively involved in the national economies. If they do that, if they give them the skills that they can do things that are necessary in the 21st century for these economies, they'll be okay. If you see a lot of unemployed people, a lot of trouble may come from that. I think I should stop here, and then we can move into a Q&A discussion. And please go to itic.net, iticnet.org, and resources, find the report and read it. Thank you.
Okay, Ariel, thank you. The report suggests two things regarding relative performance. On the one hand, two countries seem to have escaped some of the economic impact of COVID-19. It suggested growth in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, while it will drop substantially, may still be positive, whereas in the other countries of Central Asia, it would be not positive. The report also suggests that Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are the best place to recover from the economic damage done by COVID-19. Frauke, I'd like to turn to you and ask you about those two observations. Do you agree regarding those two sets of predictions or prognostications? And if so, why?
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Herbst, and good afternoon to everybody. I want to start to say that we're very concerned about all countries globally to bounce back. So we don't want to necessarily single out countries. And the bank has just last week actually submitted an approach paper to our board that is guiding our COVID response on saving lives, scaling up impact, and getting back on track. And so that is covering the relief stage of responding to COVID, but it's also talking about the resilient recovery. By June 1, the World Bank has supported 104 countries in their relief efforts. Speaking more from an agriculture and food perspective, which is the area that I'm responsible for, Europe and Central Asia, we have seen impacts on all Central Asian countries that affected the producers, but also affected the consumers. So as a paper that Dr. Cohen just presented also points out, it's important to find a common voice and common solution to food security concerns in Central Asia. So short-term restrictions on exports tend to have ripple effects and tend to increase instability more and reduce resilience of the agriculture and food sector, which is exactly what we don't want to see. And particularly given that in the current situation, contrary to the 2008 financial crisis, overall global agriculture food stocks are strong. So there isn't a particular concern on food security globally. The effect in Central Asia, and on the Central Asian economies on agriculture and food come from our view, from four main aspects. So one is the high share of imported food in Central Asian countries. almost all, so all countries are having a high share of their food imported. But then also from that, they're very dependent on Kazakhstan, on wheat and flour. So almost all imports from wheat and flour to all the other Central Asian countries are coming from Kazakhstan. Then food accounts for a large share of the household expenditures in Central Asia. It's about 40 to 60% of the household expenditures. Then there are macro effects that have impacted the current situation also. The loss of remittances, as was already mentioned, but also the devaluation that we're seeing. And then, in addition, Central Asia on agriculture and food, particularly on horticulture crops, is very dependent on the Russian market that also was affected by the COVID crisis. So the effect is that there's a risk of less export opportunities to Russia. But on the positive side, well, from our perspective and what we're seeing happening is that agriculture can contribute in all Central Asian countries to the GDP growth in 2020, particularly as the other economic sectors are struggling. And it has actually been faring quite well in all of the countries. I want to particularly highlight actually Kazakhstan on our project that we're actually very excited about, and is going to be presented to the World Bank Board tomorrow, which is on sustainable beef cattle sector development. That was, planned and discussed with the government long before COVID started, but we feel has a very strong, or will have a very strong support also for a post-COVID recovery element, in the sense that it is actually looking at working with smallholder farmers, improving capacity, linking farmers to the value chain and the export markets, and doing so in a sustainable manner. So, we're having projects in all countries. We're also working, in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan with various elements supporting with our general activities already food security levels and support, and in trying to help the people that are most affected in rural areas with our ongoing agriculture programs. We're also having beefed up support where we could in our activities. So we're actually hoping that agriculture will be a large contributor to support recovery of all Central Asian countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador, I have a couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
First, I must ask a hard question. You probably saw the EurasiaNet article the last few days, which suggests that Kazakhstan has been artificially lowering its COVID-19 numbers by labeling asymptomatic illnesses not COVID-related, or asymptomatic illness leading to death not COVID-related. Is there anything you can, any reaction you have to this report?
Well, Ambassador Herbst, thank you very much. First, I would like to say that I'm delighted to join the Atlantic Council today, and I would like to also add to what Jonathan said, that yesterday's C5+1 meeting was very important. C5+1 diplomatic platform has become a key factor of regional cooperation between the Central Asia and the United States. And we value our partnership and look forward to working hand in hand to strengthen independent, economically sustainable Central Asia. COVID-19 became a major stress to all of our countries, and we're still experiencing a lot of challenges. And COVID revealed how successfully countries can maneuver or navigate between public health, economic recovery, and long-term resilience. And we experienced from the very beginning rather moderate COVID-19 effect on population and economy, but now we see the resurgence of COVID in Kazakhstan, but I can elaborate more on that as well. But answering to your question, Ambassador Herbst, yes, it was the factor last month when the Ministry of Healthcare decided to separate asymptomatic and symptomatic COVID affected people, trying to focus on those who has produced certain symptoms. Now, I would like to say that this strategy has been changed. The total number of asymptomatic and symptomatic cases is 41,000 in Kazakhstan. These reports were, to my understanding, somehow linked to the speculation that the government was trying to hide the real numbers, which is, I don't think, a real case. We're not hiding the numbers, 41,000 asymptomatic and symptomatic. And you probably noticed as well that unfortunately, our Minister of Healthcare were infected by COVID, and now we have a new Minister of Healthcare who is very effective and efficient, and I don't think that this issue is anymore a question now in Kazakhstan. And I also would like to extend my congratulations and welcome the report that has been produced by Ariel Cohen and James Grant. Thank you very much for ITIC. And I think that the areas that you are covering, resilience, economic diversification, move from resource-based economy to knowledge-based economy, absolutely important to Kazakhstan government. We've been doing that in the past, but now we understand the real time has come to embark on a very meaningful structural reforms of the economy. We also, without losing the focus on energy efficiency, of course, we also work on monetary, fiscal, tax, and regulatory policy adjustments. And we are grateful to our friends and partners throughout the world. And the food security is absolutely important. And I would like to echo what Frauke said about our project with the World Bank. I think it is a great success, Frauke. Thank you very much for your support and cooperation. We look forward for our continued long-standing work with the World Bank team on beef and cattle industry, and Kazakhstan positioned itself in the region as a breadbasket. We are coming back to our nomadic roots, focusing more on the cattle breeding, and I think that the World Bank will help us to be there. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ambassador, just so to confirm, what you're saying is that Astana is using the crisis to push forward with more reforms. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed. This is something that was announced by the president when he was elected last year, even before the COVID-19. He said, first and foremost, he said that without further political reforms, there will be no economic growth and prosperity in the country. So he very much keeps his promises, and he continues his political modernization of the society despite the COVID-19 effect. The economic reform as well is a very important issue. And as you know, Kazakhstan has demonstrated a very solid stimulus measures investing, about $15 billion to the economy, to support the economy, which is roughly about 9% of our GDP. And about 4.5 million people receive financial assistance from the government. The small and medium-sized received a lot of support. And as you rightly mentioned, Ambassador Herbst, unfortunately, we will witness this year a decline in our GDP growth from forecasted 4.1% to much lower number. But there is a very strong expectation that we will come back again to a very good positive growth in 2021. Thank you.
Yeah, President Trump here keeps talking about a V-shaped economic recovery. Hopefully we and you and the world will have a V-shaped economic recovery. Okay, I'd like to turn to Jonathan now. How would you describe U.S. efforts through the C5+1 and otherwise to work with our Central Asian friends on resilience and dealing specifically with COVID-19?
So I would say that it's an incredibly valuable platform because I think as is emerging from this discussion that regional connectivity is going to be a part, I think, of the solution to long-term economic resilience. The energy markets is a good example. And, we have a USAID project called Central Asia Regional Energy Market that's aimed at helping these countries reconnect their energy grids, and in so doing, save money and create new market opportunities. We, of course, are working bilaterally with each country as well. And, as Ambassador Kazakhanov well knows, we are very keen to, get more U.S. investment in Kazakhstan and working very closely with his government on the reforms that we think are needed to attract that kind of investment. But the C5+1 platform, on top of our bilateral relationships, is really a unique platform that has been invigorated by a real commitment by all 5 countries who now see this as who see an opportunity of working together as a way of making them all stronger, both politically and economically.
Okay, thank you. Ariel, Ambassador Kazakhanov pointed out that Kazakhstan is using this crisis in a creative way to work on further opening its economy. Do you see something similar happening in Uzbekistan and elsewhere in Central Asia?
Well, I would go as far as saying Uzbekistan, with regards to other countries, the situation is more problematic. Uzbekistan is sustaining a reform effort since President Mirziyoyev came to power. It became somewhat of a darling of international financial institutions. It took some important steps in liberalization, but Uzbekistan has a long way to go in general and to catch up with Kazakhstan. Uzbekistan started from a lower baseline, and of course, because of that, it has a lot of turf to cover quickly, and it's doing reasonably well. When it comes to other countries, because of the lack of resources, in cases of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, or in case of Turkmenistan, because of insularity and unwillingness to open up to the world. To wit, until this day, Turkmenistan denies having COVID, despite the fact that there's broad reporting that there are COVID cases in Turkmenistan, and there are measures undertaken by the Turkmen government as if there was a COVID epidemic inside the country. So in terms of the necessary reforms, I would say with the limitations that are available because of the scarcity of resources in Uzbekistan, for example, it's only between 2.5% and 3% of the GDP that went to stimulus. To compare with Kazakhstan, 9% went into stimulus, in income support for the low-income people, in small business support, and injection of liquidity. Both Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan can borrow. The question is, can Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan also borrow, and who they're going to be borrowed from? For example, the Asian Development Bank has a $20 billion facility that Central Asian countries can borrow from. My gut feeling, I'm not an economist, but I spend my life looking at economic policy issues. My gut feeling is this is the time for the countries of Central Asia to increase their debt within limits, within safeguards and sunset provisions. So later on, when the economic situation improves, they'll pay the debt off. But this is a time to take some loans.
Okay, thank you. Many countries in Central Asia, especially Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, have millions of people working abroad, usually in Russia, and remittances from them is a substantial part of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan's GNP. Frauke, what is the impact of COVID-19 on these remittances, and on the economies of those countries which are reliant on remittances?
Yes, thank you. I mean, remittances are a very critical ingredient for many rural households, particularly in the Kyrgyz Republic and Tajikistan. And in both countries, we have seen a decline in remittances. In April 2020, the World Bank has estimated, and that's for the whole Europe and Central Asia region, that the decline in remittances is about 28% compared to last year. So that is a substantial decline, and particularly, for more vulnerable households, a significant reduction in their livelihood envelope. And so we see this particularly for, rural households. And, we are to address the immediate needs as part of our COVID recovery. The bank has engaged in economic and social protection programs. So we are on the agriculture side, we're preparing an additional financing for our Kyrgyzstan integrated dairy productivity improvement project. So that reaches out particularly to more remote, smaller farmers to help them, cooperate together and integrate. And dairy particularly provides a daily income. So it helps a little bit the resilience effort also in bouncing back compared to other crops that you have to wait until they're being harvested. In Tajikistan, we have also ongoing activities that support smallholders on horticulture development and increasing the income from agriculture. And it also provides, business training and education opportunities for returning migrants, and is combining it with credit support to help them start their agriculture activities as well. In generally, on overall, what Dr. Cohen was mentioning, vocation, educational training, all this we consider extremely relevant and is a long-standing engagement of the World Bank. In our agriculture and food practice, what we're trying to do is actually integrate a lot of that capacity building into the project and programs that we're designing, so that there's capacity building for farmers, for extension workers, veterinarians, government, and food laboratory staff. It's also often, support is provided to agriculture entrepreneurs to improve their businesses and, strengthen the cooperation and information sharing among farmers. That is also an element, on the sustainable livestock development program that we just discussed in Kazakhstan as well, where the program is helping training farmers on better agriculture practices, on better management of their pastures, and is also, increasing knowledge on extension workers and veterinarians, to address production diseases. So all of that has also a huge impact on resilience, but also allows, increased income from these activities that hopefully supports, some of these dents that are made for these rural households in their lack of remittances or the reduction of remittances that they're facing, or provides new opportunities as more jobs and incomes opportunities are created on agriculture activities for, as an incentive to, see that as an alternative to maybe going abroad for remittances purposes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was a nice comprehensive answer. I'd like to broaden the conversation a little bit now. Ambassador, we all understand the importance of C5+1, and I'm a huge fan. But something which has also happened in the last few years, which is a very positive development, under the leadership of both Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, has been the emergence of a forum in Central Asia. How is this vehicle being used to work on the COVID-19 problem in the region?
Well, Ambassador Herbst, thank you for your question, but I want to come back briefly to the previous question related to COVID-19 resilience. I simply want to say that despite of all the comments and some social media discussions, Kazakhstan has managed to produce enough PPEs, and we have enough medication, and also we managed to have about 2 million tests locally produced. And I would like to take this opportunity to extend my sincere appreciation to the US government. USAID provided its support worth of $3.6 million to the frontline workers in Kazakhstan. And we're lucky we have a regional office of CDC and exchange of expertise is absolutely valuable with the CDC office in the region. And yeah, coming back to your question, yes, we, as you remember, there were two big summits of the leaders of Central Asia. The first summit was in 2018 in the capital of Kazakhstan. The second summit was last November in Uzbekistan. And the next summit is scheduled to take place in Kyrgyzstan this summer. Initially, it was planned for August. We're still waiting for more information about the details of this summit. Certainly, if you remember, our first president, Nazarbayev, even in the 90s, he was a very strong proponent of united Central Asia, because, and he was always promoting the concept of stronger Central Asia, because only united we can better face all the threats and challenges that we have. Now we see a good progress, we see a good understanding. I would like to refer to the growing trade turnover between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. You know that there was most recently there was a disaster in the southern part of Kazakhstan with the flooding. That the dam in Uzbekistan has been breached, and two countries cooperated very effectively. We are working together, and I think the understanding is growing. I think that the C5+1 platform helps us to get stronger together. You know that Kazakhstan proposed an idea of signing an agreement on good neighborly relations, partnership and cooperation between Central Asian countries. I think we are moving in the right direction, and we're glad that we see growing understanding among the countries on stronger integration in the region. And also it is even more important given the changes in the global supply chain, and also we see that many countries are revisiting their investment policies. So I think that Central Asia can fill its niche in economic environment, in a new economic environment. And I would like to mention here what Jonathan said is this initiative on economic prosperity network. That include companies and civil society groups operating under the same set of standards. I would like to say that Kazakhstan, as a country in the region, has been always trying to work hard to meet international standards when it comes to intellectual property rights protection, when it comes into the investment legislation and other incentives. And you know that Kazakhstan has opened an Astana International Financial Center that operates under the English common law principles, which I think another incentive for the companies to look into the Kazakhstan as a gateway to Central Asian region. And I would like to stop and say that, yes, the summit is on the way. We're looking forward for summit in Bishkek, and we hope it will produce a very positive result.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up. If the summit is hard to do or impossible to do in person, might it happen virtually?
By all means, we already have several summits in the region that took place virtually, and this practice proved to be very effective and efficient. We are adjusting to a new normal, and I think if there will be no chances to meet in person, definitely the summit will take place virally. And you know, I just want to remind everyone from what we understand, even the next general debates of the United Nations in September will be also taking place virtually. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. All right, we have a question from Deborah Coulter Harris. I think it's for Ariel and maybe also for Jonathan. She says, you talk about Central Asia, she's referring to the report, transitioning to renewable energy sources. Which Central Asian countries are leading the way on solar, wind, and hydro? And then for Jonathan, how is the U.S. supporting this effort? Ariel, to you. I think you have to mute yourself.
Sorry. Let's distinguish between the potential and the current achievements. As early as 2012, together with the Brookings Institution, we wrote a detailed study, I think it was over 80 pages, about the future pathway for Kazakhstan in terms of the renewable energy. Back then, we didn't fully realize how fast this transition is going to be, but even in 2012, 8 years ago, we recommended that Kazakhstan educates its decision makers, its engineers, its lawmakers to understand what renewable energy is, what kind of legislative and regulatory base they need. And I think they did a pretty good job so far. So I would say Kazakhstan, with the Burnoye photovoltaic solar park and with other projects, has the most in terms of the current achievement. However, if you look at the illumination by the sunlight, a place like Turkmenistan, parts of the Karakum Desert in Uzbekistan have tremendous capacity for solar, and northern parts of Kazakhstan, the steppe, where the winds are blowing on, have a tremendous capacity for wind. Finally, since the Soviet era, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, which are blessed by tremendous hydro resources, hydroelectric energy, and the Soviets were building hydroelectric power stations. Some of the stations need repair and fundamental renovation, but the water is still there. Another concern is because of the global warming, some of the water flow is declining, and that is something for us to take into account when we're thinking about the negative impact of the climate change and the global warming. But today, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are exporting clean hydro energy to the neighboring countries, and there are even plans to build high voltage transmission lines from Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan into Afghanistan and then to Pakistan and potentially India. We need peace in Afghanistan to do that, just as we need peace for Turkmenistan, Pakistan, India, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline. But as they say, inshallah, God willing, with peace will come these important energy developments.
Jonathan, are we, the United States, helping deal with the issue of renewable energy in Central Asia?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Cohen kind of hit the nail on the head in the sense that there's a lot of renewable potential, but in order to exploit that potential, you have to have kind of a foundation of a regulatory framework in addition to transmission lines, et cetera. So the bulk of our support to date, I think, is in helping to establish that foundation, helping to establish the software so that these countries can actually sell, electricity or power to one another. We are also big supporters of CASA 1000, the high voltage lines that Dr. Cohen mentioned, to connect the hydropower in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to Pakistan. And of course, we do, I think, have ambitions to move more aggressively into the renewable energy field. I think once we make sufficient progress in these other areas.
Thank you. We have a question from Ambassador Dick Hoagland. Has the current global economic crisis set back or delayed China's Belt and Road Initiative in Central Asia? Ariel, you want to take that too?
Sure. Thank you, Dick, and thank you, Deborah, before that. I think that China is experiencing some technical difficulties because of COVID. From what I see, both the imports of raw materials from Central Asia and the investment into Central Asia declined in double digits. If I remember correctly, gas import declined between 20 and 30%. The import from Russia through the pipeline is frozen. And we will see how fast China recovers and how does that affect Central Asia. I think this is an important moment for the United States. We are behind China in terms of our involvement. Deputy Assistant Secretary Hennick mentioned $500 million of US investment in the region. China invested orders of magnitude more, in tens of billions of dollars. So if we want to play in that sandbox, if we want to play a serious geostrategic game vis-a-vis China and Russia, we need to remain in the region. If we come to a conclusion through a deliberative policy process that this is, as I called it in my 2005 book, Eurasia in Balance, a bridge too far, then we need to draw conclusions and abandon the turf. I don't think it's going to happen. I think we understand, our decision makers understand how important Central Asia is in terms of economic development, in terms of markets, in terms of investment target, but also in terms of our engagement globally.
Thank you. We have a question from Nazbahur Imamova for the DAS Hennick. The question is, have you seen Steve Blank's recent policy brief on U.S. strategy in Central Asia? And specifically, how should the U.S. counter China, maybe by offering better alternatives, especially under the current circumstances? Your thoughts?
Trust Nabahar to ask me a question that I can't answer. So no, I have not seen Steve's report yet, but I will certainly look for it. If I could just clarify, the $500 million I mentioned, of course, was actually U.S. assistance to build health systems capacity alone in Central Asia. Of course, our investment, U.S. private investment is considerably higher. I'm not pretending that it'll equal the levels that we're seeing from China. But as Dr. Cohen knows, as well as I do, the way to attract U.S. investment is to create the conditions where that investment feels welcome. U.S. investors, will go where they think they can get the best return on their dollar. And that's why we're focusing our efforts, in partnering with the governments in the region to create, to engage in those reforms, those, regulatory reforms that will make that, that will really prove attractive to that type of investment.
Okay, thank you. We have two anonymous questions relating to Uzbekistan. One from someone with the interesting moniker of Azimuth Yellow. And I guess these really go for you, Jonathan. What do you think of the emerging power of opposition in Uzbekistan? And is the government of Uzbekistan taking advantage of COVID-19 to crack down on opposition?
It would be anonymous, wouldn't it? So I can't speak to any kind of emerging opposition movements in Uzbekistan. Obviously, we watched their elections last year very closely. Are certainly encouraged to see more diverse members of parliament. But Uzbekistan, has a long way to go, and I think they recognize that. And so the role of the parliament going forward, the president said, will be more significant, and we'll be looking to work with a strengthened parliament as an important democratic institution in Uzbekistan. And what was the second part of the question, Ambassador? I couldn't remember.
Is there any indication of them using COVID-19 to crack down on their opponents?
It's, I think that's something we're concerned about around the world. Obviously, there are a lot of governments that, might have, less than fully democratic tendencies that might see or feel compelled to use this crisis as an opportunity to, silence criticism. So I'd say we're keeping an eye on it. Certainly there are draft laws in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan right now that would, give the government the authority to shut down so-called fake news sites. The civil society and media organizations there have expressed concerns about those laws, and certainly we share those concerns as well. But I have nothing particular to comment about in Uzbekistan with regard to that question.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. It's a rather complicated one from Callaway Sprinkle. I'll read it slowly. Considering that many infrastructure projects funded by international financial institutions and loans from national development banks have stalled during the COVID-19 pandemic, even as options in the fiscal space are limited by increased spending on recovery efforts, how ought Central Asian governments approach the question of debt sustainability and refinancing? Frauke, I think you might be the natural person to answer this difficult question.
I'm not sure if I'm the natural person because I can't answer for infrastructure particularly, but I wanted to highlight that actually we from the Agriculture and Food Practice Group, we're actually seeing a lot of the projects continuing, a lot of the activities continuing. So there's a lot of effort on the side of the government and also on the side of our other implementing partners to really move forward, to move on. So we don't see a particularly stalling. I mentioned in the beginning, I mentioned this approach paper that basically is framing our COVID response. And part of that approach paper is also asking for to look into what do we have actually in our current portfolio. So not just looking into new lending activities, but also looking how can we use the existing portfolio, how can we restructure, or how can we potentially also cancel some activities to free up room for recovery efforts. So that is an exercise that has been ongoing globally and also in Central Asia, that we've looked at our portfolios and seeing so how can our portfolio support the current situation. And overall in the bank, there's certainly also discussion on debt relief and going on and happening. So that is also actively happening. But overall, I don't think we're seeing a substantial slowdown. In fact, some of the countries, particularly on the COVID relief, were very, very, fast in approving their project and also, getting, procuring the activity and the goods and materials that they needed. So we actually rather see an uptake than a slowdown.
Okay, thank you. Ariel, do you want to jump in to add anything on that question?
Sure. The question was complex, but I somehow understood it. And the answer is...
No less from you.
What's that?
We expect no less from you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And if you permit me, I was asked to mention, and I should, that the lead intern on this was Raushan Jandaeva from Kazakhstan, who did a tremendous job.
Well,
so
yeah.
back to the question. I think everyone, including the United States, should keep in mind that when you borrow money, at some point you have to pay it back. And if your growth is faster, your GDP growth is faster than your debt growth, you're fine. So let's say you're projecting after COVID, sooner or later, COVID crisis will end. Even if now they're saying may not end for another year, but after 1 year, it will end. And Central Asian countries, as developing countries, will go back to their normal rates of growth, 4, 5, 6, 7%. So you project the amount of money you're borrowing now, you keep in mind and you enforce the borrowing discipline, that your borrowing is not continuing indefinitely like Greece. You stop borrowing at some point, and then you project how much your GDP is going to grow and what is going to be the percentage with that assumed rate of growth vis-a-vis the increased rate of repayment of the debt. If your math pans out, go ahead and borrow. If you think your growth is going to be very low, your GDP will go down eventually, then don't borrow.
That's a good final word. I would like to thank all of our panelists for lively discussion. I'd like to thank the International Tax and Investment Center for doing this project with us, doing this event with us. And we will do more stuff, especially on C5+1, but more broadly on Central Asia in the months to come. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.